During my last visit to the Republic of Ghana in April 2024, I observed one thing on nearly all the banknotes of the country, the Ghanaian cedi. I observed that most denominations of the Ghanaian cedi had the photographs of 6 persons. I saw these photographs on 5 cedis, 10 cedis, 20 cedis, 50 cedis, 100 cedis, up to 200 cedis. On my way to the Christiansborg Castle in Accra, which first served as the seat of colonial government and later served as a slave dungeon for European slave traders many years ago, and also served as the presidential office for Kwame Nkrumah and other presidents including Jerry Rawlings, I saw the statue of 6 men just by the road, just after the Independence Square. I then asked to know who these 6 persons are. I was informed that they are the persons known as the Big Six in the history of Ghana. I did a search and realized how significant the story of the Big Six is to the history of Ghana. In this edition of Back in History, I present to you the story of the Big Six and also present to you the profile of each of these 6 gentlemen that made up the Big Six. Welcome to this edition of Back in History. The Big Six in the history of Ghana had the 6 frontline nationalists who spearheaded the struggle for the independence of Ghana. They are the founding fathers of Ghana. At the time of their struggle, what is today known as Ghana was known as Gold Coast. Gold Coast had been in the colonial dominance of the British imperialist forces for several years. Governors and every other important administrator in the Gold Coast were British citizens. In essence, the present-day Ghana was under full colonial dominance, and this lasted for many years. But one thing we cannot take away from the colonial government is the fact that they offered formal education to the people of Africa. Schools were built and expatriate teachers were posted to teach in these schools. This is how several children in Africa were given the opportunity to embrace formal education. This is how young people in Ghana went to schools, and upon graduation from elementary schools, most of them had the opportunity to go abroad to further their studies. Some went on scholarship, while others were sponsored by their families. These sons and daughters of Africa that had the opportunity of furthering their education abroad had the opportunity of sitting in the same classrooms with sons and daughters of the colonial people, attending the same places of worship with them, eating in the same restaurants with them, and even playing outdoor games such as football with them. The myth and the aura around the colonial people gradually became demystified. The colonial people were humans just like the people of Africa. These educated Africans then began to query seriously why their countries were subjected to colonial dominance by foreign powers and why their resources were being exploited in the process and taken abroad while their homelands remained in poverty. They began to mobilize themselves into groups abroad, and when most of them were done with their studies, they returned home. The Big Six were Ghanaian citizens who returned from abroad to forge a common bond to fight for the independence of their motherland. It was not going to be an easy task. It was a task to challenge the superpower. The odds were many, but the task needed to be carried out regardless of the odds that lay ahead of them. The first thing they did was for them to form a political movement known for short as UGCC, that is, the United Gold Coast Convention. This was the first nationalist movement in the Gold Coast. It was founded in August 1947. Its primary mission was the actualization of self-governance for the Gold Coast. The Big Six were the founding members of this group. They embarked on the mobilization of their fellow countrymen, both the highly educated ones and the less educated ones, to join in the movement for the emancipation of the Gold Coast from the clutches of colonial dominance. They also identified with all such groups that complained about what they perceived as exploitative tendencies of the colonial people. One of the groups that complained bitterly against the colonial power was a group of Second World War veterans, Ghanaian citizens who had fought on the side of Britain during the war. These persons had been recruited by the British government to fight against the Allied forces during the war. Some of them died in battle. Others survived. Britain had promised them pay off, but long after the war, the money so promised was not paid to them. The veterans complained bitterly, and when their complaints were not attended to, they took to the streets to protest the neglect. Members of the Big Six offered their support to the veterans, and as a matter of fact, they identified with them in the protest. Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, a leading member of the Big Six, met the veterans and addressed them. He did so in the company of Dr. J.B. Dankwa, another leading member of the Big Six. They encouraged the veterans not to relent in their protest. As noted earlier, the veterans were citizens of the Gold Coast who fought with the Gold Coast Regiment of the Royal West African Frontier Force and had not been paid their gratuities on their return from the war. The support given to them by the Big Six did not go down well with the colonial government, but there was no substantial reason for the colonial government to go after the Big Six. There was no offense committed by them, but the traps were set for an opportunity to get the Big Six arrested and detained. Indeed, the Big Six had entered into the bad books of the colonial masters by their conduct of supporting and identifying with the veterans. On 28 February 1948, the veterans took their protest to the seat of power of the colonial government. The place that served as the seat of government at the time was the Christiansborg Castle in Accra, Ghana. This building is still standing till today. It is just beside the Atlantic Ocean and enjoys the full breeze of the ocean every minute of the day. Yours truly has been to the Christiansborg Castle on a tour and was indeed taken around the rooms of the castle. This is where the colonial governor at the time, Sir Gerald Greasy, was resident. The veterans went to the gate of the mansion to register their protest and further ask for the payment of their outstanding monies. Rather than listen to them or attend to them politely, the police superintendent at the time, Colin Imray, a British police officer, ordered the veterans to disperse, and when they refused to disperse, he ordered his men to open fire at them. His men were hesitant and thus did not open fire, and in anger, the police superintendent opened fire by himself and killed 3 unarmed veterans, namely Sergeant Cornelius Frederick Adjetei, Private Odete Lamtei, and Corporal Atipo. This action did not go down well. It resulted in a violent protest, looting, and near breakdown of law and order in Accra. In the process, European and Asian stores were looted. The riot was very serious and almost uncontrollable. It lasted for a period of 5 days. The colonial powers and the renegade superintendent of police may not have foreseen such level of violence from a people that had always been seen by the colonial government as docile and incapable of violence. The tail of the tiger had been touched, and the reaction was unimaginable. In the heat of the violence, the leaders of the Big Six group sent a message via cable to the Secretary of State in London, which read thus, quote, "Unless colonial government is changed and a new government of the people and their chiefs installed at the center immediately, the conduct of the masses is now completely out of control with strikes threatened in police quarters, and the rank and file police indifference to the orders of officers will continue and result in worse violence and irresponsible acts by uncontrolled people. The people are prepared and ready to take over interim government. We ask in the name of the oppressed, inarticulate, misruled, and misgoverned people and their chiefs that Special Commissioner be sent out immediately to hand over government to interim government of chiefs and people and to witness immediate calling of Constituent Assembly." End of quote. This message did not go down well with the colonial government. It was seen as a subtle call for independence of the Gold Coast. Such call was considered offensive at the time it was made. No country in Africa had been granted independence at the time, and the telex from the Big Six following the violent suppression of the veterans was seen as an audacious action that needed to be drastically crushed. On March 1, 1947, the Riot Act was read out by the colonial government, followed by an order to arrest members of the Big Six. The police were sent out to get them arrested, and indeed, the Big Six were arrested and detained in the remote northern part of the Gold Coast. Following their incarceration, these 6 persons became really popular and soon became known by their countrymen and women as the Big Six. The 6 persons were Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, Dr. Joseph B. Dankwa, Ako Adjei, Emmanuel Lamtey, Edward Akufo-Addo, and William Ofori Atta. On March 8, some teachers and students demonstrated against the detention of the 6 nationalists, and in reaction to this, the teachers were sacked by the colonial government. Agitations went on for their release, and eventually the 6 persons were released. The Big Six became more emboldened in their open call for the grant of independence to the Gold Coast. Until this day, these historic steps remain indelible in the history of Ghana. Analysts have said that it was the action of the Big Six that resulted in the early grant of independence to Gold Coast. The Gold Coast was the first country in Africa to gain independence. Here is a brief profile of the Big Six. First is Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. Nkrumah was born in his village of Nkrofo in 1909. Nkrumah attended schools in Ghana, including the famous Achimota College, and later proceeded to the United States, where he attended the Lincoln University. Nkrumah later returned to the Gold Coast and took active part in the agitation for the grant of independence to the Gold Coast. When this was eventually achieved, he spearheaded the call for the change of the name of the country from Gold Coast to Ghana. He was a prominent member of the Big Six. He became the first prime minister of the country and also became the first president. He was a nationalist par excellence, and through his relentless advocacy, other countries in Africa were supported to attain independence. The name Kwame Nkrumah resonates in the history of Ghana till today. At the Kwame Nkrumah Memorial, located in Accra, Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah has been duly immortalized by the government and people of Ghana. The next name in the Big Six is Ebenezer Ako Adjei. Ebenezer lived from 1916 to 2002. He was a lawyer by training. He was also a journalist and a politician. He attended a number of schools including Lincoln University, Columbia University, and London School of Economics and Political Science. He held several political offices in Ghana, including Member of Parliament, Minister of Justice and Interior, and Minister of Foreign Affairs. He played a major role in the agitation for his country's independence and was a prominent member of the Big Six. The other person was Joseph B. Dankwa. Joseph lived from 1895 to 1965. Joseph was a lawyer, politician, and scholar. He was one of the eldest among the Big Six. He attended schools in the Gold Coast and later proceeded to the United Kingdom, where he studied law at the University of London. He was called to the bar in the Inner Temple. He then returned home and began his law practice and also took active part in the mobilization of like minds for the agitation for the independence of the Gold Coast. He was an active member of the Big Six. The fourth person was Emmanuel Lamtey. He was affectionately called by his friends as Liberty Lamtey. He was born in April 1902 and lived till 1963. He attended the Accra Wesleyan School. He thereafter moved to the United Kingdom, where he studied law and was called to the bar at the Inner Temple in 1939. Following the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939, he could not return home immediately. He stayed back in the UK to work, and when the war was over, in 1945, he returned to the Gold Coast and took active part in the struggle for the emancipation of his people from the clutches of colonialism. He was a prominent member of the Big Six. The fifth person was William Oforiatta. William was born in 1910. He lived till 1988. He was popularly called Pa Willie. He was one of the founding fathers of the United Gold Coast Convention and one of the founding fathers of Ghana. He was one of the prominent members of the Big Six and was among those detained by the British colonial administration. Upon the grant of independence to Gold Coast, William served as Minister of Foreign Affairs. He attended a number of schools, including the famous Achimota College and the University of Cambridge. He later studied law and was called to the bar in 1956. The sixth, but not the least, was Edward Akufo-Addo, father of the President of Ghana, Nana Akufo-Addo. Born in June 1906, the Honorable Justice Edward Akufo-Addo died in July 1979. He attended the Presbyterian Training College, Akrompong, and Achimota College, Accra. Done with his primary and secondary education, he proceeded to St. Peter's College, Oxford. He completed his law studies and was admitted to the bar at the Inner Temple. He thereafter returned to Gold Coast and took active part in law practice and also joined forces with his fellows in the United Gold Coast Convention, the UGCC, to advocate vociferously for the grant of independence to his country. He was one of the 6 men detained by the colonial government. Upon the grant of independence to Gold Coast, Edward took active part in the administration of the new country and was later appointed to the Supreme Court as a Justice of the Court. He later served as the Chief Justice of Ghana, and from 1970 to 1972, he served as the Ceremonial President of Ghana, while Dr. Kofi Bousia served as the Prime Minister of the country. He was married to Adeline Akufo-Addo, and together they had 4 children. Indeed, the story of the struggle for the independence of the Gold Coast, now Ghana, is not complete without the mention of the individual and collective contributions of the Big Six. It is therefore no wonder that their faces remain engraved on a number of banknotes, the official tender used till today in the Republic of Ghana. For us in Back in History, we extend our best wishes from next door Nigeria to our brothers and sisters in Ghana, even as they continue in their immortalization of the names of the persons who denied themselves of personal comfort to take up the struggle for the attainment of self-governance and emancipation of the African race from the clutches of colonialism. Thanks for watching this edition of Back in History, and do remember to subscribe to this channel or follow the page for regular notification on every new video. I remain your friend and host, Ekemini Udim, wishing you the best of time as we continue to journey together on the mission for documentation of the African story for the benefit of today and the enlightenment of tomorrow.